Welcome everyone. Today's webinar, NSF Guidance on Financial Management of ATE Grants. What you don't know can hurt you. Today's February 10th, 2016. I'm your host, Mike Lasecki, here at the Maricopa Community Colleges. As I mentioned, this webinar is being recorded within 24 or 48 business hours, I guess, or days. You'll get a link to the recording and the slides as well, so you'll have that for your record. Let's go ahead and get started today. We had a little glitches getting started with the webinar service disruption, but we're doing fine. We'll hook up our last speaker in just a moment. Let's get going for today. Let me tell you a little bit about the webinar details of this event. In this webinar, you're going to be in listen-only mode using your computer or phone. Please ask questions via the question or chat window. And as I mentioned, the webinar is being recorded and you'll be sent a recording link. This webinar is brought to you by the Center's Collaborative for Technical Assistance and our colleagues at Mentor Connect with support from the National Science Foundation, as you see on the slide. What is the CCTA thing? Well, it's led by 5 centers. You can see their names here: the National Convergence Technology Center, SCATE, FLATE, BioLink, and Maytech Networks here in our own district at the Maricopa system. The purpose of the Center's Collaborative is responding to a request from the Department of Labor to have the National Science Foundation ATE centers provide technical assistance and services to labor grantees and others. Well, this is under the form of success coaching, in-person convenings, knowledge management, peer-to-peer learning, and of course, webinars like this one today. These activities are relevant for all of us, right? Whether you're a Department of Labor grantee, a National Science Foundation project or center, workforce-oriented folks, people in grants management, business offices, all relevant to what we're doing. And what are the deliverables of the CCTA? Well, topical webinars like this one, and other online media, including videos and transcripts. And you can see the archive of these webinars in a variety of ways. One of them is atecentral.net. And finally, there'll be other deliverables of our group, including regional discipline-specific conferences, papers on documenting white practices, and convenings. You'll hear more about those at the end of today's webinar. So it's time for a poll. You've been listening to me talk. How about if I ask you a question? Let me put a poll up on the screen. And I'd like you to respond, if you could, to what is your affiliation, okay? Are you a PI on a grant, or maybe you're a main grant lead, not really called a PI, or project staff member. Number C, you could be in grants management, or maybe you're none of those. That's fine. I see everyone's going ahead and putting their information in. Thank you. This isn't a hard question. Okay, let's give a countdown to 3 and let's see what the results here are. 3, 2, 1. Let's close the poll and now let's share the results. So look at that. The majority of us are in grants management or the business office. Not surprising by the topic of today's webinar, right? Okay, great. Let's go forward. It's my pleasure to introduce our facilitator for today, Elaine Kraft. Elaine, go ahead.
Thank you, Mike. I too want to welcome everyone to today's webinar and to mention that the 2 NSF ATE funded projects that have collaborated to make today's webinar possible, Mentor Connect and the Center's Collaborative for Technical Assistance. I serve as the Principal Investigator for Mentor Connect, and my colleague Ann Behaler serves as the Principal Investigator for the Center's Collaborative for Technical Assistance. As Mike described earlier, CCTA provides technical assistance related to producing better outcomes once funded. Mentor Connect, on the other hand, provides mentoring and an array of resources to help guide potential NSF ATE grantees in actually becoming grantees. Mentor Connect provides a searchable online library of resources, one-on-one mentoring, and a series of technical assistance workshops related specifically to the preparation of a competitive grant proposal that conforms to NSF guidelines. Next week, for example, Mentor Connect will be providing a webinar that includes step-by-step guidance in developing a budget and budget justification for an NSF ATE grant proposal. There will be more information about this opportunity later in the webinar. In today's Technical Assistance webinar, you will have the unique opportunity to learn some specifics about financial management of ATE grants that will answer common questions about how grant funding works at the NSF. You will also receive information that will guide stewardship of these federal funds at your institution. It is my pleasure today to introduce you to our speakers. Dr. Celeste Carter is the lead program officer for the ATE program in the NSF Division of Undergraduate Education. She will provide a framework for today's webinar and help you understand the two primary touch points with NSF that impact grantees. Also joining us today from the NSF Division of Grants and Agreements is Grants and Agreements Specialist, Mr. Rashawn Farrior. He has extensive experience working with NSF processes associated with making and monitoring grant awards. Now, I'll turn the program over to Dr. Carter.
Celeste, we don't hear you at this point. I see you're muting and unmuting your phone, Celeste. I'm not sure what the issue is, but if you like, you could call in. Oh, is that you, Celeste?
Okay, did that work?
Yes, I hear you now. Thank you.
Okay, good. All right, let me start again. I'm glad everybody can hear me this time. Welcome to everyone. It's great to see the number of people that have logged on to this webinar, and welcome to all of you. I'm going to start just with a brief overview of the Advanced Technological Education Program, which is housed in the Division of Undergraduate Education at the National Science Foundation. And this is a very interesting program because it is focused on community and technical colleges, and it also has the goal of educating entry-level science and engineering technicians for high technology fields that drive our nation's economy. This was the first congressionally mandated program that Congress had NSF develop, and that came out of the act in actually a public law in 1992, the SATA Act, S-A-T-A. So the program, just in a real nutshell, because I know everybody wants to hear from Rashawn, focuses on 3 different tracks. There are projects, ATE centers, and a final track of collating and collecting evidence about best practices and what actually works or does not work in technician education programs. If you look at the solicitation for the ATE program, looking across those 3 tracks, funding can be from $150,000 all the way to $4 million over the respective different types of projects or centers that would be funded. And one of the interesting things I want to point out is I've got pathways delineated. ATE can support grades 7 through 12, 2-year and 4-year institutions. Part of it is dependent on what's in red down there, your industry partnerships. We want to have really strong education industry partnerships in ATE so that the students that are coming through the programs, our industry is really going to look at them as a prospective employee and say that they have the educational background as well as the technical skills and competencies they need to really kind of hit the ground running for whatever the industry is. The other thing is that, and I know it was one of the questions that came in advance, one of the questions was, is there a requirement for ATE funds to be used at 2-year institutions, or do 4-year schools with workforce development programs qualify? You do qualify, but you need to be working with your community and technical colleges. So at that point, a 4-year institution could certainly be in the lead fiscal agent role, but we would expect to see, and reviewers would expect to see, community and technical college faculty having some leadership on that project. There are some four-year schools that include a two-year school within them. That's something that just needs to be explained in the proposal itself. So with that, there is a proposal deadline this year of October 6th, 2016. So with that, let me go on to just a brief introduction of a little bit about why we think this webinar is so important. If I could have the next slide, thanks. This talks a little bit, I'm not sure I got every single one, but these are some of the responsibilities. The program officer is the main person with the disciplinary scientific expertise that you could talk to. So one of the things you do when you come to NSF, and I would say that faculty can think about coming here in a position called a rotator, where you leave your institution for 1 to 2 or 3 years. You don't lose anything as far as retirement benefits, because NSF makes an award to your institution for the time that you were here, but you actually get to come to NSF and serve as a program officer. So I can handle any of those questions about that at a later time. But some of the other things we do is, as a program officer, we actually get to have input on revising or developing a new program or revising an existing one. Dear colleague letters are another mechanism that the NSF uses to solicit proposals from people. There is a current ATE Dear Colleague letter out that you could look for. The number is 16-007, and there are some other community college specific Dear Colleague letters out as well relating to math education and Hispanic serving institutions. So you could look for those on the NSF website, nsf.gov. One thing we can do at any time for you is, if you submit to any program officer a 1 to 2 page synopsis of your project ideas, we can actually give you some feedback on it. Sometimes it's, boy, this is a great idea, but you're going to have to really beef up the faculty expertise. We don't see where that exists in your institution. Or maybe we might be able to virtually network you with someone who has a similar project, and you can actually see and leverage results from someone else. We form panels of the proposals, so we sort them into panels, we invite reviewers, we oversee the entire NSF merit review process, which is really the main mechanism that we use for thinking about what proposals will be going forward with a recommendation for award. Okay, and notice in that next bullet down I say we negotiate with you to make a recommendation for award. I've been here as a permanent program officer for a little over 6 years now and was a rotator before that. I have never awarded a single proposal. So that's where Rashawn is going to come in. The other thing we get to do is we get to conduct outreach activities really to inform all of our communities about funding opportunities at the NSF. So I've got one more slide, if I can have the next slide, and it looks a little bit confusing, but this is something that's particularly important if you or your institution has never received an award from the National Science Foundation, or you haven't had an award within 5 years, or you have never been reviewed by, and here we go with acronyms, okay, I tried to explain them within this. CAR, C-A-A-R, is Cost Analysis and Audit Resolution. So I'm going to look at the top part of this where it says you submit a proposal, and that first blue arrow says it goes to merit review. So let's say it reviews really well. A panel of your peers gives you 5 excellence, highly competitive proposal. So the program officer also reads your proposal, and if we agree with all of those ratings, we're going to have 2 different things to do. And the one that's most transparent to you is we would actually send you an email saying that, gee, your proposal reviewed very well, a few questions were raised, and we would like your input on these questions. If we begin a negotiation, we intend to make a recommendation for award, and we'll usually ask you to please submit your responses within a certain number of business days. These are questions about the actual project itself, qualifications of your personnel, courses you intend to develop, what kind of professional development activities you want to do. All of those types of things are what a program officer will ask you about. The other thing we do, since you would be a new performer, is we'll send your proposal to the Division of Grants and Agreements, and it's the grants officer, Rashawn, in the case of ATE, who actually is going to go over your proposal as well, especially with an eye to the budget, and is actually going to make the award. But what I wanted to point out here is that the first thing that happens when a new performer goes down to the Division of Grants and Agreements is your institution is going to receive what's called a new performer package. Hopefully you're able to complete that. It's about policies and procedures on a number of different items that I'll let Rashawn go into. You're going to complete it, return it to the Division of Grants and Agreements, and then there's another section in the National Science Foundation called Cost Analysis and Audit Resolution. They look at your package, and pretty much what they're doing is they're going to come down and they're going to say yes or no. Your institution actually has all the policies and procedures in place to adequately handle federal taxpayer funds. So if we get a thumbs up, DGA is going to notify, so Division of Grants and Agreements will notify the program officer and say, go ahead, you can actually make this recommendation for award. If CAR says no, your institution did not adequately respond to the new performer package, then the Division of Grants and Agreements is going to say, hey, this is going to have to be a decline, and we will debrief the institution. So I wanted you to know that there's two completely separate things. And let's say it was that proposal that got 5 excellence. It's heartbreaking to all of us that we would have to say this was a decline because Cost Analysis and Audit Resolution did not see that you could handle funds. So that's my intro for Rashawn, so that he can pick this up and tell you even more about the Division of Grants and Agreements and what goes on. So Rashawn, I'm going to, and if there are any questions, maybe we could let Rashawn go.
I think we'll do that.
Unless it's a specific one.
Celeste, let's do that. Rashawn, let's do an audio check with you. You sound okay?
Can you hear me?
Excellent. Go ahead.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. I am happy to be a part of this webinar today. Once again, my name is Rashawn Farrior. I am the grant officer for the ATE program. I've been here about 8 years, and I've been a grant officer for about 15 years.
Rashawn, let me interrupt. We're getting an echo, and I wonder if you might have your computer speakers on.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
I'm still getting an echo. I'll ask the other presenters to mute themselves. Go ahead, Rashawn.
Okay.
Thank you.
Is that better?
That's perfect. Go ahead.
Okay, wonderful. So, like I was saying, I have over 15 years of federal grant experience, so it's great to be here. And I wanted to, before I went into my part, I wanted to talk about what Celeste was talking about first, since that's fresh on everyone's minds. So if you're a new awardee and you are in that process, one of the biggest things that I could tell you is to make sure that whoever you have on that proposal cover page, and that's going to be the business official or whomever that you designated as the point of contact, make sure that person is adequately prepared for that new awardee package. That package is going to come in the form of an email, and make sure that every question and document that is requested you submit. I want you to be very mindful of the information that you submit is what the Cost Analysis and Audit Resolution branch will review. If you do not present all the documents in its entirety, we're going to review the packet as what was presented. There's been too many instances where grantees did not submit all of the documents required, and they ended up getting declined because we tried to constantly reach out to the grantee to get the information, and either it was the wrong person or they didn't understand, and so they ended up getting declined. So we don't want that to happen. So the process can range depending on the time of year. So for right now, I actually have 30 new awardee packages that are actually coming my way, so I'm overjoyed about that. So we are very, very busy. So I will give you a review of what we did last fiscal year. We completed over 22 actions last year. We're only a staff of under 30, and we are even, I think we're about 25 now. And basically each person does around 1,000 actions each year. We also participate in what we call monitoring assistance with our program staff, so we do a lot of outreach with them. And we also do what we call an advanced monitoring site visit review. It is not an audit, and Bahaler has been through one and survived at Collin County Community College. So at a certain point, I wanted her to speak on the actual process of what that was, or that experience was for the college. And basically, the site visit is really an opportunity for you guys to really just pick our brains. You have us for roughly a whole week. And basically, there's a lot of coordination between the universities, colleges, etc., with NSF staff prior to. So we give you pretty much like a 3-month warning to say, hey, we're coming out here. How about this month, this week, blah, blah, blah. And then once we get out there, we basically go through your policies and procedures with a fine-tooth comb and basically help you see how you actually manage your federal award. While we're there, that's your opportunity to ask us any questions, any roadblocks you're experiencing, problems or questions you want to bounce off of us while we're there. That's what we're there for. And once we're there, if we find something that may be problematic for you, that maybe an auditor would find, what we would do then, we'll give you a recommendation. And with that recommendation is basically to say we recommend the following actions of change. And we'll give you 90 days to respond, and then basically it's almost like a plan of action. But it gives you an opportunity to make sure that the ship that you're running is well-oiled and your machine is running well. So I always like to tell grantees, do not panic when you see an email from us saying we want to come and visit your institution. It is not a bad thing. I always tell grantees, you would like to see me first before you see the Office of the Inspector General, which is what we call the OIG. And if you see the OIG, usually that is a bad thing, that there's some kind of activity that might be deemed questionable, and even it's on some levels criminal in nature. So you want to see me first, because I'm going to help you and make sure that there's nothing that could get you in trouble. So next slide, Mike. So as the awardee, there's certain obligations that you have as an awardee. You must follow certain policies and procedures. So basically, once you receive that award, you are now adhering to all the terms and conditions of that award. You want to make sure that once you accept the award, and when I say accept the award, when you decide, okay, we're going to take this award and we're going to draw down that first dollar of that award, of this AT award, you are now legally bound to NSF. So make sure that you are aware of all the roles and responsibilities of the grant and that you're okay with it. And by all means, if you have any questions when you get your award letter, feel free to give me a call, send me an email saying, Rashawn, I don't understand this. Please let me know. That's not a problem. Also, the awardee will be responsible to make sure that all the expenses, all the expenditures are allowable. So making sure that things are actually allowed, allocable meaning that you can actually place them in certain categories, and making sure that those costs are reasonable. And like I said before, just making sure that you're complying with all the federal guidelines and statutes. Next, please. So one of the other topics, which is usually big with a lot of grantees, is time and effort. And basically with time and effort, there's basically you want to make sure, for one, with all of your budget line items, you want to make sure that you have policies and procedures for each one. So with time and effort, that's dealing with salaries. So you want to make sure that there is policies and procedures that state how you actually pay your salary and compensation for those individuals. You make sure that it's a part of your official payroll. You must reflect 100 sponsored and non-sponsored. So if you have federal awards and non-federal awards, make sure that it can reflect that percentage level of 100%, up to 100%. And you should be able to reflect that across multiple activities. So if they're doing an award with DOE, or they're having a Department of Energy, and the PI has another activity with NSF, they should be able to reflect each of those activities on a timesheet, okay? And make sure that you should be able to charge the same amount of the grant as your institutional salary. So basically, you can't charge the federal government more since it's a federal grant. So you must stay consistent with that rate. Make sure that all the related work is actually performed. And then also, one of the biggest things that we always see is when I go out to your institutions, I can see sometimes where they'll actually have their time and effort reporting based on what was budgeted. You can't do that. You have to make sure, it's fine in the beginning if you do that, but you want to make sure that you reconcile that with what is actual. So if you say you're going to do 20%, but in actuality you only did 20, you have to make sure that it's reflecting your actual effort, level of effort on the project. You can't use what was budgeted, okay? Thank you. Mike, next slide. So in my budget review, there's a lot of things that I look at. So it's almost like you're getting a second review, but also look at it, I'm looking at it from a different standpoint. So when I say I'm verifying all the PIs and co-PIs, so basically what I'm looking at, I'm making sure that these individuals have not been debarred, that they are actually allowed to work on a federal award. And basically we have a system where we actually look through and see if these individuals have been debarred, okay? Also, I check the calendar months or summer months added. So in that regard, I want to make sure that you have not exceeded the 2 months rule or anything of that nature. And if you did you have adequate justification of why you needed an additional month? I also look at your salaries and fringe benefits. Make sure I follow that. And I usually look at that from the vantage point of, does it seem excessive for the amount of work performed, and making sure that it's actually allowed. Equipment, if your award has equipment, I usually look at the equipment and make sure that the equipment is actually necessary. I look at your facilities and resource page to make sure that your institution can actually perform and have a has the space to actually occupy that equipment, and if it's necessary for the project, because sometimes what happens, grantees will ask for a piece of equipment, but they may already have that equipment, saying with another project. And so if that's the case, you may not actually need that piece of equipment because it's already been sponsored by another federal entity, okay? Another issue I always look at is travel. If the PI is traveling, I usually try to see exactly where they're going, what is the purpose, if they're presenting, and basically seeing if it's allowable, especially if it's deemed with international travel. The program officer and I usually work really, really close together, and they usually give us notes saying if this is a part of the project and it would benefit the overall program itself, okay? With participant support costs, this is one of our big items. In that review, I usually check to see exactly what are those costs, because those costs are delegated out into 4 different categories. You have stipends, you have subsistence, you have travel, and you have other. And with participant support costs, you just want to make sure that those costs are allocated properly. Sub-awards, I check with sub-awards just to make sure that once you submit the sub-award, I have sometimes problems with grantees, or grantees have problems submitting that sub-award, a part of their budget, especially if it's after the fact. And when I say that, they'll say, well, we couldn't add the sub-award to the actual budget pages. If you run into that problem, what has happened is that sub-award entity has not been adequately registered with CCR. I think that's one of the registration sites for the grantee as the sub-award to register, and then they would have to go into the registration and actually register as that, which is the U.S. contractor registration site, okay? I obviously look at other direct costs and see if those costs that are in that particular budgetary line item is reasonable, is allowable, is it allocable, okay? And then the other one that I look at is indirect costs, and I make sure that the base and the you're using your applicable rate. So I'll go into that in another slide. Next slide, Mike. So participant support costs. Participant support costs is a unique line item category for NSF. So these costs are really geared toward the student. So I just came from a site visit that where the institution actually put additional costs for, say, travel for an employee of the institution under participant support. You can't be an employee of the university or college and put it under participant support. So saying you have students and you have chaperones that are going to, say, a poster conference or a symposium, or there's something of that nature. Those individuals that are escorting the students, if it's even if it's the PI has a separate travel line item, and so if there's any other employees that are tied to the grant, they would have to use regular travel, not participant support travel. So that's something I really want to take home to you guys. Also, make sure that you have separate account codes. It's imperative that you do this, because those costs, if I come out to your institution and I want to know you had 20 students to go to a conference in California, I want to see their flight, their hotel accommodations, and I want to see how much all of that costs just for these 20 individuals. If you do not have a separate account codes for participant support costs, it could take you days to extrapolate that information. So it is very important that you have separate account codes. So if you were asked to pull out, say, in just stipends for the particular fiscal year or even quarter or what have you, you will be able to drill down those numbers really fairly quickly, because most PeopleSoft and other grant award-making software can facilitate those needs. Also, for the most part, participant support costs is generally excluded from the indirect cost rate. So usually I will check your federally negotiated rate, and I think of my 8 years here, I've only seen one institution where it was not excluded. But that was just, and I've been here a while, so that was very rare, but it did happen one time. So make sure that you do not include it. If you do include it and I'm reviewing, what I will have to do is ask for you to revise the budget, exclude those costs from your indirect, and then still keep the bottom line at the recommended amount from the program officer. So those are some things that can actually hold you up. And now the rebudgeting restrictions. Last year, you could say rebudget items without NSF prior approval for participant support, okay? So saying if you wanted to put money in that line item, say from travel to participant support, that's fine. If you wanted to do it from salaries and put it in participant support, that is fine. What has changed is if you want to change funds or move funds between those particular participant support costs. So if you wanted to move money between stipends and travel, or from subsistence into travel, or vice versa, or other into stipends, you would need NSF prior approval. And that approval will be submitted via FastLane, and then it will take you to research.gov, and that will be approved from the NSF Cognizant Program Officer. So that's something different. So I'm still trying to figure out what was the justification of the change, but that's the change as we speak. Okay, next slide, Mike. So one of the big things that we wanted to drill home is those changes. With the new guidance, virtually all of those changes are still okay. You do not need NSF prior approval to move money from salaries into, say, the PI's travel. You do not need NSF approval if you wanted to move money from other direct costs into participant support costs. You do not need NSF approval if you wanted to move money between salaries for, say, the PI wanted to move money in for the graduate student or technician. You do not need to have NSF prior approval on any of those budget changes. We get a lot of phone calls and a lot of emails about, well, I know I can, from the PIs especially, the PIs will call and say, well, I know I don't need NSF approval, but my Office of Sponsor Program office is telling me they need something in writing. What usually will happen is either the program officer or myself will simply state, we cannot offer any approval on something that you're already allowed to do. So this is something I wanted to make sure we are very clear on. The only time you're going to need NSF prior approval if you want to take money out of the participant support line and take it outside, or if you want to move money within those 4 line items, you will need NSF prior approval. If you move any other monies outside of those 2 scenarios, you do not need NSF prior approval, and you do not need an email from either myself in the grants office or Celeste as your program officer. You are allowed to do that, and that's under your FDP partnership guidelines. So you have that authority, so you are okay. And other than that, I think the slide pretty much says itself, okay? So next slide, please. So some of the issues that I see when I'm looking at budgets, especially with sub-awards, sometimes grantees will say they have, say, 3 sub-awards, and they give me the justification of who's joining the project, but I don't have a budget. For every sub-award that you attach to your proposal, there must be an accompanying budget and budget justification. Another issue that always come about is incorrect or no indirect rate applied. So make sure if you are your institution has a federally negotiated rate. Most of those rates are either established either through your cognizant agency. So basically whoever has the most federal funds, so it could be different agencies. So usually there are 3. It's either Office of Naval Research, NSF, or the Department of Health and Human Services, DHHS. So those are usually the 3 ones that you'll see. And what I do is I look at that rate agreement, and whatever rate you have on that rate proposal at that time, that is the rate you should use. You can't use a rate that's not there. You can't arbitrarily just put a rate down, because that's going to make me ask you to submit a revision applying a correct rate. So in another instance, if you do not have a rate, you can use what we call a 10% de minimis rate of modified total direct cost, and that's going to exclude your participant support. But you can use that if you do not have a federally negotiated rate. Now I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes. Another thing I see, if grantees do not exclude, if they have sub-award, this is just with sub-awards, the first 25K, and that's that 25,000. And sometimes they'll just include it all. So if you have so be very cautious and make sure you subtract that out. And also another thing that I see is the lack of policies and procedures. This is very, very important because you want to make sure that when you're dealing with sub-awards, that there is very clear lines of division. And when I say that, I want to make sure you understand. So when you're coming up with your sub-award agreements, make sure that you're stating everything and covering all bases. You want to make sure that you have a statement of work, the period of performance, what is the actual duties. You want to make sure that you include all the flow down provisions. So whatever the federal government requires you to do, you will have to then make sure that that sub-award will also do the same, okay? You want to make sure, excuse me, that the, I think that was it, yeah. You want to make sure that there's a termination. You can come up with the, and yes, I just saw your question, and yes, you can charge the indirect on the first 25,000. But what happens, saying I have situations where they don't even charge that. So basically, if it's a $50,000 award, they would just literally, saying it was $50,000 for a sub, they would include all of that. They wouldn't take that first 25 out. So that's what I'm stating on that. Okay. Thank you for that, Ann. And that's it on that particular one. Next slide, please, Mike. Okay. So indirect cost rates. This is what I say, maybe, I think maybe around 2 or 3 years ago, basically the National Science Board here at NSF stated that there was no way that their grantees could run a grant without indirect costs, because there are certain things that are just essential to running a project. You need lights, you need computers, all these extra expenses. So with that in mind, all proposals and awards have to use their federally negotiated rate. And we don't, and I'm saying we from the NSF perspective, we do not saying if you have off-campus or on-campus instruction on research, however you want to state it, on your rate agreement, NSF cannot tell you, the grantee, which rate to use. That is determined by the grantee, and then we must honor that rate, okay? So another, you must show your base and provide indirect calculation, okay? So you want to make sure that you provide the base to your calculation. Also explain any exclusions. One of the things that can hold up your grant is saying, if you say, I'm looking at your rate agreement and you're stating you have these exclusions, okay? But the one thing, the biggest exclusion that is usually not identified is tuition remission. Please include the amount of the tuition for each year, because that also, because I have to back out of these numbers that you're providing me. So I can say, okay, I see where the grantee came up with this number. If I can't come up with that number, then I have to call you, I have to ask more information. So it's very helpful if you could include, especially with tuition remission, in your budget justification to include the actual amounts for each one. And so I spoke about this earlier. Also, you can use the 10% of modified total direct costs if the grantee does not have a federally negotiated rate. You can't use 0, because if you use 0, it's deemed involuntary cost sharing, which is prohibited by NSF. So you have to use a rate, okay? Next slide, please. So these are just some frequent errors that I see on budgets. And these are things that can actually slow up the, basically you getting your money, because basically if this information is not here, basically I have to, like I said, ask for additional information, and that can take up some time. So here we go. No dollar amount associated for PIs or co-PIs. There has to be some level of a dollar amount attached to each PI. Sometimes you'll see, oh, well, they're going to just be the PI, but they're not asking for any salary. They have to associate some dollar amount to each one, okay? Also, there's no participant support count. If you look at your budget and you're putting in the participant support and you put the dollar amounts down, if you look on that budget page, it has a number at the very bottom. You have to include how many participants you have, so make sure you include that amount. And sometimes, like I stated before, that sub-awards are not excluded from the indirect, depending on how many you have. If you have, and they're over that 25K, sometimes they don't exclude it. Their indirect cost rate is not used correctly. So in that sense, saying if you have your indirect cost rate is only for salaries and wages, what I see is sometimes the grantee will use it on modified total direct costs. So then I have to go back and ask for a revised budget and say, you know, per your federally negotiated rate, you can only charge on salaries and wages only. So make sure you are aware of your federally negotiated rate and you're using it correctly. Also, little to no budget justification on line items. Make sure that if there's something that you think might need additional information on, please provide it. If you're asking for $1 million, please make sure you have $1 million worth of justification, because you'll be amazed how many times I get very little to no budget justification for $1 million grants, and it's my responsibility to make sure that we are basically paying attention and scrutinizing what has been requested from the grantees. So next slide. So notification. So really quick, I know you guys most of you love FastLane, and we appreciate it. FastLane is going away. We don't know exactly when, but it is being phased out. So with these requests, if you go to FastLane, most of them are still there. If you go in and request it, it might send you and redirect you to research.gov. Research.gov is going to be the new hub for all requests. So for right now, FastLane is still up and running, so you can still use that that site. So FastLane is still up, but this is how you submit notifications for changes of any administrative changes you may have. Next slide, Mike. So pathways to success. It's imperative that you guys have effective communication, and when I say that, that's across all fronts. I want to make sure that the business office has a great reputation and rapport with the PIs, and the PI should do the exact same to the Office of Sponsor Research. There's many times where PIs will try to have me referee between the two entities, and I'm not a referee. And so it's good if you guys can actually communicate and understand. Another thing, know the requirements of your award. Read your terms and conditions, the uniform guidance, the super circulars, things of that nature. Make sure you understand what you are getting or about to get into. If you have any questions about the terms and conditions of the award, by all means, please give me a call. We can go over it. If there's something you don't understand, but always ask, and I'll make sure that you are aware of what is being required. Good accounting practices, making sure that you can segregate those different items of cost is always a good business practice. Make sure that you read the solicitation again. Usually it's a year from the point that you first submit that proposal to the moment that you get it. So it is imperative that you go back and read the solicitation, see what requirements are expected of you from NSF. So that will save you a lot of time and confusion. Review the budget with the PI, and that's for my Office of Sponsor Program and Grants staff. Make sure before the PI receives the award and you notify them, make sure if you could, if it's possible, make sure you have like almost like a refresher course to walk the PI through the process. Make sure that they understand you are required of this, your progress reports are due at this time, and all of those technical items that are so important, so the PI is aware of what they are required to do. Always document, document, document. Make sure that you have great grant records to show correspondence, things of that nature between the program officer, myself. That way, if anything ever comes up and someone asks you a question, or why did you do this, or well, we had a conversation with the program officer, so make sure you keep great documentation of the correspondence between program officer, myself, and your sub-awardees if you have sub-awards. Next slide, Mike. For more information, you can always come to our NSF homepage, which is nsf.gov. We are actually, we'll be moving, I think Next year, we're moving to a new location. We'll be moving to Alexandria, Virginia. So we're excited about that move. You can actually learn about that move and other things that's going on with NSF on our page about new solicitations, new grant opportunities. So if you haven't visited the page, please do. There's a wealth of information there along with great tips and advice on the whole grant process. Next, please. And as always, ask early, ask often. I love to make sure that there's no question that is too silly or you think maybe not necessary. Please ask me. And that's it. So thank you guys. If you have any questions, please let me know.
Rashawn, it's Mike. We've got a little echo here. I'm going to ask our other presenters to make sure you're on mute.
Hey, Mike, this is Celeste.
Hello, Celeste.
And if you can hear me,
yes.
I wanted in particular to go to the one question that said, if a particular consultant, contractor, or grant evaluator is named in the grant, in the budget, and the grant is awarded, is the grantee at liberty to issue a contract to that particular party without obtaining other quotes or bids? Our PIs are viewing that in that scenario. NSF has authorized use of that particular contractor. And I wanted to kind of put in my 2 cents and ask Rashawn if he would comment as well. I just found out about a particular award. And remember, we go through the merit review process, and one of the big things we're looking at is qualifications of your project personnel. And that includes your evaluator and all of your contractors, as well as your sub-awardee people. You get a rating based on what's in your proposal. If you then go out and dump all of those people and bring somebody in that, say, gives a lower bid than they do for the same work, if we find out about that, my standpoint is we probably wouldn't have made the award in the first place unless they had equal or higher credentials than the people you named. And so I was hoping that, I don't know, Rashawn, if you could speak to that as well as my standpoint would be, you need to keep the people that were on your original proposal, and unless somebody retires and then you ask for a change of PI or co-PI or a change in your evaluator.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with you 100% on that one, Celeste. It's pretty much whatever you're presenting as a part of that project is how you were recommended. So if there's some kind of change or something didn't work out, you have to talk to your program officer prior to making that change. And that way, everyone is in the line of communication. So it's imperative that if you think about a change, or you select a different contractor than what you originally stated, or you picked a different consultant than what you stated in your original proposal, it is necessary before you do that you consult with your program officer. So yes, Celeste, I would agree 100%.
Thanks, Rashawn.
And I wanted to see if you could speak on your experience with our site visit that we did with Collin County Community College, if you could.
Thanks, Rashawn. Am I echoing? If I am, maybe everybody needs to go on mute because you were echoing too, Rashawn, at the end.
It was Celeste.
However,
it was Celeste, and she's muted herself now, Ann, so you're okay. Go ahead.
Okay, good. All right, well, I'm not going to take up the time because I know you want answers to questions, and we're going to have to meet together and figure out how to address all these questions because we really only have 6 more minutes today. My comment would be that working with our business office and our grants accounting manager, Cindy Commuse, we went through all the regs and made sure that we had all the documentation ready to be accessed. I won't say we created it. We didn't. We were already doing what we were supposed to do. And Rashawn told me that he looked really, really hard and tried to find something wrong, and he didn't find anything, which is absolutely wonderful in my book, and it worked very, very well. A couple of pointers I would say is we have a very detailed MOU with each of our sub-awardees. We only give them a year at a time, and there are performance criteria associated with that. We have policies and procedures for just about everything under the sun. And specifically, we have documented why we chose the sub-awardees we chose. and what they were supposed to do and how we monitor those sub-awardees. That was something that perhaps some folks hadn't thought about. I mean, I'm sure you have the reason for why you would choose a sub-awardee, but it was important that all that be documented. And then I would say basically just necessary and reasonable costs. Certainly not any hotel rooms that are $1,000 a day or something like that. Our costs were all necessary and reasonable, and we followed the rules for participant support. So I'll just stop at that point because we have a lot of questions and we're going to have to figure out how we want to handle all of those and get back to you.
Thank you, Ann.
Thank you.
I have a question, lots of chat about this contractor business, and here's what we know at our system. I thought I would just add too, that our business office says just because we have named somebody in the proposal does not forego bid requirements that our institution might impose. Is that true, Rashawn, from your point of view?
Repeat that question again. I had it on mute. Repeat the question.
And our business office says just because we have named a consultant or an evaluator in our proposal, that doesn't necessarily forego bid requirements that our institution might impose. That's correct. That's correct, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So that's one side of the coin. Just because you've named them doesn't mean
it's approved.
Now, Celeste, you made a comment that, look, you can't go in there and change them because we've evaluated on that basis. So there's like a conflict there, isn't there, Celeste?
I'd like to make a comment. This is Ann before Celeste jumps in.
Yeah.
We all have the opportunity to do sole source, and I would think that almost all of us would be able to go sole source if we have documentation, at least even from this particular recording, that in fact that Celeste and Rashawn, their groups, expect the people that were in the proposal to be the ones that are the awardees. I think that might be the out on that.
It's a good point. Celeste, I'd like to unmute you, but we're still getting an echo every time you come on. So make sure if your phone is hung up. I'm going to bring you back on for a second, Celeste. Let's try you to respond to that. Go ahead.
Okay, is it echoing?
You're okay now.
Okay, all right. So my point is that you know, everybody talks about the National Science Foundation merit review process as being the gold standard for the entire federal government. And we really look at the qualifications of the people you name, and most of the time, if you're putting in your budget to be hired or to be named, and your proposal reviews well, we're going to come and still ask you, who are you going to use? Because if you let's say you come back and you say, oh well, my evaluator is going to be my co-PI. That's a big red flag. That's a no-no. There's a distinct conflict of interest. And I think the idea that you name people in a proposal, it goes through the merit review process, we're making a decision on whether or not to make a recommendation for award based on the qualifications of the people you named. And if they're all then removed, I suppose what you could do is for every single time there's a change, you file a formal change in FastLane so that we could see, and you include the CV or resume of the person that you're replacing someone with. It still gives us the option at that point. We can deny it. We can say, no, the person you named in the actual proposal has more qualifications to carry out this project than the person you just sent to us in this request. So I think it is, and I understand that institutions have their own policies and procedures, but you've got to realize that one of the things we work with is we're trying to be as fiscally responsible with our federal taxpayer dollars as possible. And if we're basing our recommendation on the people you've named, it seems to me there's some sort of obligation that those are the people you use.
That's a great comment. I hope my own sponsored research office is listening. Celeste, I'm going to put you on mute for a second. Folks, I think we should make this like a multiple-part webinar series on this. Rashawn, we're going to have you back. I think, and we will figure out a way to maybe post some of these questions and some answers. There's a lot of good ones, and you know, we're right at the conclusion of our webinar time today. It's been so exciting. Rashawn, I'm going to end with just one question, and I know our own grants management office is listening to this answer. I love that discussion of we don't need to give you permission to do something you already have permission for. So I like that. And you alluded to FDP. And so there's some chapter and verse out there. I Googled it while I was waiting here, and I saw it said Federal Demonstration Project Guidelines Matrix. Is that it? Approval Matrix? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
Okay, so that's something I could quote, and I saw that matrix. I could quote that to my business office saying, hey, look, I don't really need to ask for this because I've got my own approval.
Correct.
All right, I like that. Thank you very much for that. Friends and colleagues, this webinar is being recorded. The chat, we're going to analyze the chat questions and see if we can't do something in creating a response here. There's just been a huge interest in this topic today. As we go forward, I'd like to let you know that next week there's another webinar co-sponsored with Mentor Connect, and Dr. Celeste Carter is back with us. She's going to talk about preparing a budget and a budget justification. And you know, Celeste, one of the questions came up today is, can we get samples of those budget justifications? Maybe. I hope you'll address that next week. Rashawn, you're right. A detailed budget justification, if you put in the details, it's going to fly through. If you put in nothing,
correct,
it's gonna cause something.
It's going to stop.
Right. So thanks very much for saying that. That's next week, and there's the registration link, folks, mentorconnect.org. Don't forget the hyphen because you won't get there otherwise. You know, we have some more webinars coming up in this wonderful series. A part 1 and 2, the first one on February 25. We call it Building Communities of Practice, and it's quite an interesting topic. You can see the description of the webinars there. Go ahead and go to your usual place, atecenters.org/CCTA, to register there. This summer, if there's one conference you go to in the entire year, it ought to be Pittsburgh, PA for the High Tech Conference, now in its 7th year, attracting somewhere between 600 and 700 people that are all focused on technology education. We'll have a special event associated with the CCTA that trails the conference. So look for more information at highimpacttech.org. You can register for that conference, and you can see the notice here on the bottom of the slide about the follow-up technical assistance webinar. So as we come to the close today, you can see the things, and I have to admit, the NSF program officers, they actually do respond to you. I've called them, I've emailed them, other people have, they will respond. Of course, might take them a little time to get to you, but they're sincere when they mean write to them, contact them. You can see their emails here. Ask early, ask often. That's just a lovely thing, and it's a guideline that I've tried to follow, and I think it really works. I wanted to personally thank our presenters, Dr. Celeste Carter and Rashawn Farrior from the Grants DGA Division, Grants and Agreement Specialists. Rashawn, thank you very much for the time today. Elaine Kraft, thank you for joining us at the beginning, and Anne for talking about your wonderful experience with audits. So friends, that officially concludes our webinar today. It will be recorded. We will send you the link. Thanks very much. Goodbye, everyone.